Most people picture the tabernacle as a finished jewel that descended from heaven, a perfect tent, complete and radiant, waiting only to be unveiled. But the text itself asks us to lift the curtain on a different truth. The tabernacle arrived because hands took raw things and made them sacred. It was won by sweat, shaped by skill, taught at benches and looms, tested on the road, and carried by the calloused palms of a people learning to worship. This is the story of how God's craftsmen managed to build the tabernacle in the desert. We begin in the second year after the Exodus. The people have left Egypt behind, and Moses is called to the mountain. There he receives not a vague suggestion, but a precise pattern, measurements, materials, and images that must be translated into wood, metal, and cloth. The divine blueprint is given. The command that follows is practical: bring willing offerings. Those offerings are not abstract pieties. They are gold and silver and bronze, dyed linen, ram skins, acacia logs, materials drawn from a world they once served as slaves and now offer freely for a holy purpose. The most striking of those gifts are the spoils taken from Egypt. Necklaces and bracelets, pins and rings, items that once ornamented status, are gathered not for private glory, but to be beaten, melted, and reshaped into the devices of worship. The very objects of a foreign court become raw material for a nomadic sanctuary. That conversion is central. Technique survives across cultures, but its aim is redirected. The same metalsmithing know-how that made decorative jewelry in Egypt now serves to craft the lampstand, the altar fittings, the rings, and clasps that will hold the tent together. It is into this charged and literal workshop that two names stand out: Bezalel, son of Uri from the tribe of Judah, and Oholiab, son of Ahisamach from the tribe of Dan. Scripture tells us that the Spirit filled Bezalel, giving him skill, intelligence, and knowledge in every craft. Oholiab is named as his deputy, an artisan and a teacher at the bench and at the loom. But the biblical notes are brief. They leave the rest to the imagination, and in our case, to careful historical reconstruction. What follows is grounded in the canonical sequence: pattern, offerings, gifted craftsmen, construction, and in the living textures those few lines imply. Picture the first workshops in the Israelite camp. A ring of lean tents frames small open areas where fires burn low and steady. Charcoal smoke curls over bundles of acacia wood. A woman tightens a warp thread until the linen sings under her fingers. A young man bends over a basin of water and rinses gold leaf with a reed scraper. The air is full of small sounds that together become a single purpose: the making of a house for God. Crafting the tabernacle is a dozen crafts folded into one project. Metallurgy, woodworking, weaving, dyeing, leatherworking, stone setting, and assembly must come together. Each trade is a conversation with materials. Start with the metal. Gold in ancient Near Eastern contexts often came as thin sheets and as small ornaments. To make elements such as the lampstand, described as being beaten out of a single piece of gold, artisans would need to repeatedly anneal and hammer. Annealing relieves stress in metal and requires heating to a glow and then controlled cooling. It is likely, based on comparative archaeology, that smiths here used simple pit furnaces, charcoal fuel from acacia, and leather bellows to raise the temperature. These reconstructions are offered with caution. The archaeological record cannot give us furnace blueprints, but comparative data and practical metallurgy teach us what would be feasible with the materials and skills at hand. Imagine an apprentice at the anvil. He cradles a lump of gold until the glow reaches the point where a hammer blow will spread the metal rather than shatter it. The smith feeds air with bellows, an animal hide squeezed by hand, and the flame breathes higher. Each strike is measured. 1, 2, a pause to tap and listen. The hammer's music is not random. It is the tempo of transformation. Bezalel watches closely. He guides the rhythm until the gold stretches, thins, and begins to take the curve of a branch or the shallow bowl of a lamp. When the text records that Bezalel was filled with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, and with knowledge in every craft, it sketches a moment in which divine gifting and hard-earned mastery meet. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, plays a different role. Many of the tabernacle's utilitarian elements, bases, sockets, the altar in the courtyard, require strength and a different approach from gold. Bronze can be cast in molds for repeated shapes or hammered for fittings that need to be resilient. Casting demands another set of skills: mold making, control of molten metal, and timing. The camp metalworkers form simple molds from clay or sand to create identical sockets for the acacia planks, rings for poles, and fittings for altars. Where precise casting is required, say a set of identical rings that must fit snugly into a board, an artisan must anticipate the shrinkage of cooling metal and the way a pore will fill the void. Again, these are technical reconstructions rooted in what craftsmen could do with the tools and materials at hand. Woodworking in the desert brings its own challenges. The chosen wood is acacia, a close-grained timber resistant to decay and abundant in the region. Acacia logs arrive from heavy loads. They are squared into planks, smoothed with adges, joined with tenons, and fitted with bronze sockets at their base. The boards of the tabernacle stand vertical, linked together with silver-covered rings and crossbars. Each board must be precisely measured by the cubit, planed flat, and checked until the assembled wall is straight and stable. The poles used to carry the ark are inserted through rings, and those poles must not only be strong but balanced so that when men shoulder them, the weight rests evenly. Textiles form the soft architecture of the sanctuary. Skilled women and men weave linen and wool into curtains, coverings, and priestly garments. The dyes, blue, purple, and scarlet, are costly, with blue often coming from a sea mollusk and purple from special murex dyes, though archaeological debates about the precise sources continue. The loom is simple but exacting. Tension matters. Warp threads must run true. A slight slippage will distort an embroidered cherub or break the symmetry of a veil. Weavers work in teams, with apprentices passing shuttles, a mistress of the loom directing the rhythm, and fingers that know when a thread is too tight or too slack. The weaving of cherubim into the inner curtains is not mere decoration. It is a theological image woven strand by strand. Sewing and finishing bring small but crucial details: the sewing of the curtains into panels that can be folded, the attachment of woven loops to receive the gold-covered hooks, the placement of bells and pomegranates along the hem of the high priest's robe, so that sound and symbol move together. These sounds, the tinkling of bells when the high priest moves, are intentional. They announce approach within the holy space. The breastplate that holds the Urim and Thummim requires not just metallurgy and gem setting, but also a spiritual weight. These objects are for discernment within a covenantal relationship. We treat their description with reverence and avoid speculative theology. They are part of the structure through which Israel will seek direction. As these crafts unfold, organization must follow. The camp is not a modern construction site. It is a community learning to give freely and to work together. Yet there is structure. Bezalel and Oholiab are named leaders precisely because people must be taught. Their role is less overseer than master teacher, demonstrating technique, correcting angles, organizing teams, and fostering apprenticeship. A typical scene: early morning light on a shared workbench. An older smith shows a younger hand how to fold metal without creating a crease that will tear later. A woman, her hair braided tight against dust, draws a line across a panel of dyed linen and shows 3 apprentices how to form the cherubim's wing with a single confident stitch. The pedagogy is literal and spiritual. Under Bezalel's instruction, skill is not just a trade, it is a way of forming a people. Men and women shift from enforced labor under foreign masters to voluntary sacred labor. That movement is not merely social, it is psychological. Work that in Egypt signified bondage is now redefined as worship. Volunteers press their offerings into service.
A former slave who once turned a pot for a palace now turns a piece for a table of meeting.
The act of offering gold, fabric, skill is itself an act of identity formation. Within this social remaking are small human dramas. An apprentice named here only as the boy with the slow hand struggles to keep consistent hammer blows. He fears his mistake will render a lampstand useless. Bazzello takes his hand, steadies it, and teaches him to listen for the change in resonance as the metal thins. Another scene, a woman weaver whose fingers tremble after an illness relearns how to control the shuttle, and in the act discovers that service sharpens her sense of belonging. These micro scenes do not invent scripture, they inhabit the human space implied by it. They tell how technique, teacher, and community combine. Technical challenges are many. The menorah's description suggests a complex form, with cups, knobs, and flowers. To achieve this from a single casting or a single worked piece of gold requires mastery of repetitive annealing, planishing, and meticulous joining. If gold objects arrived as jewelry, craftsmen would first melt ornaments and refine impurities out before forming larger sheets or shapes. Refinement likely included repeated melting and skimming of dross. For bronze, the alloy ratio affects fluidity and hardness. A piece intended for bearing weight may have a higher copper content. One intended to capture fine detail may include more tin. Scholars and experimental archaeologists offer probable ratios, but we frame them as reconstructions. What would have been workable, not a mechanical formula prescribed by the text. Logistics in a desert camp raise separate questions. Where do we store finished items? How do people protect delicate curtains from sand? How are heavy boards moved without breaking? The answers are practical. Finished items are stored in clean tents lined with woven covers. Staves and poles are lashed and padded. Sledges, flat boards run on sand with lubricated ropes, are likely used to move oversized elements short distances. The ark and the table are wrapped in skins and cloth and transported on poles that never touch the ground, lest the holy objects be profaned. These are not innovations intended to mimic modern packaging, but sensible adaptations to nomadic life. Carrying a fully assembled board with its pole is itself a ritual of coordination. Men must shoulder simultaneously, counting steps, aligning breathing, and adjusting to the unique weight distribution. Rehearsal matters. The Levites are trained in handling the pieces, in caring for their coverings, and in moving with the order required by the later ritual prescriptions. Their training changes them from a disorganized camp into a body that can sustain a mobile sanctuary. Testing the work is as practical as it is symbolic. Will the loop hold the ring? Does the gilding stay adherent after weeks on the road?
Craftsmen insist on trials. Test hangs of curtains, loading and unloading the arc stand to check for strain, and walking the route with pole-bearing men to anticipate how the fabric will flap in wind. Minor failures are expected and corrected. In one imagined rehearsal, a ring tears free under stress. The smith is called back, the ring reforged, and the team learns the limits of their materials. Failure tempers pride into humility. It also reinforces the communal character of the project. Mistakes are not private sins, but public lessons. As the final pieces come together, there is a series of assemblies that must happen in order. The frames are erected first, fitted into their sockets. The inner curtains are hung and covered by the outer curtains. The ark is set in the most sacred compartment. The lampstand is placed opposite the table of showbread. Each alignment is precise. The inner sanctum is a geometric and theological censor. The last day before the dedication is one of hush and polishing. Men file the edges of rings until their touch is smooth. Women stitch last-minute seams and sew on loops. The air carries the scent of beeswax as oil seals are applied to wood, and glitter of beaten gold lifts into sunlight. Then comes the moment described in Scripture, the work completed, the people gathered, and the Spirit's sign of acceptance. The text records that when Moses entered the tent of meeting, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. That cloud is not a mechanical reaction to craftsmanship. It is, in the biblical account, the sovereign sign that the maker receives the offering. For the artisans, the cloud's descent is the answer to months of labor and teaching. Not a reward for flawless work, but a sign of covenantal presence. Men and women who had learned to place each stitch and every hammer blow before God are now shown that their labors have a place in the divine economy. The moment of dedication is the most reverent scene. Picture the community. A low hush falls. A collective intake of breath. Smoke rises from incense. The metallic clangs have stopped. Only the soft sound of cloth settling remains. Then light and shadow shift as a cloud moves and rests upon the tent. Eyes that had watched the work now fill with tears. Some release is private. An artisan presses his forehead to a polished board. Others stand silent, hands clasped. The texts do not dwell on spectacle. They record a sign and the emotional response that follows. For the craftsmen, there was a double recognition: the tangible beauty they produced and the intangible acceptance by the God who called them. After dedication, the tabernacle becomes a mobile presence, governed by ritual rules and a new social order. The Levites maintain and transport the pieces. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night guide the camp's movement.
The sanctuary's mobility is not an accident. It codifies Israel's identity as a people whose center travels with them. The craftsman's work must be durable and repeatable. Curtains that fold without tearing, poles that endure, lampstands that can be relit after a night's journey. The tabernacle is both architecture and liturgy in motion. The social transformation that made this possible is profound. Formerly enslaved people are now voluntary laborers, offering skills and goods as an act of covenant. The community's voluntary contributions create not only materials but social cohesion. The crafts become a site of spiritual formation. Apprenticeship shapes patience, fidelity, and attention. The maker who tunes a thread learns to listen in a new way. The smith who times a hammer blow learns restraint. The weaver who repeats a pattern learns rhythm. These are moral and spiritual disciplines as well as technical ones. We also should notice the cultural borrowing in the project. Egyptian techniques, metalworking know-how, weaving patterns, dyeing methods are not replicated as foreign religion. They are adapted and reoriented. To borrow a technique is not to borrow its meaning. The gilded motifs, the skillful castings, and the complex textiles are transformed in purpose. What once adorned the palace now frames an ark. This reorientation underscores how material culture moves across borders but can be reinterpreted within new theological frames. At several points in the work, the question of contingency arises. What if a crucial ring failed at the wrong moment? What if a bolt of wind tore an inner curtain during transit? The biblical text presumes that such trials will occur, but it also shows a community capable of repair. The ring is reforged, the curtain is resewn. The craft knowledge here is not romanticized, it is pragmatic. Practical wisdom, how to treat an irritating offset in a board or where to place a reinforcing strip of leather, becomes part of the communal memory. Along the way, the narrative refuses to homogenize the labor. Men and women contribute in distinct but overlapping ways. Metalworking tables and weaving looms sit near one another. A carpenter may share an insight about jointing that helps a leatherworker when constructing cases for sacred implements. The leadership of Bezalel and Oholiab is collaborative. Their giftedness lies not simply in individual skill, but in their ability to teach and organize, forming a network of competency across the camp. If the texts emphasize Bezalel's spirit-filled skill, they also emphasize the role of teaching and multiplication. Whatever gift is present, it is meant to be shared. A few technical notes are worth pausing on, even as we keep them framed as careful reconstructions. The annealing of gold and hammering required cycles of heating and cooling. Leather bellows or double bellows systems are plausible technologies for increasing furnace heat.
Bronze casting likely used clay molds, with clay or sand cores for hollow forms. Looms in the ancient Near East were predominantly vertical or warp-weighted. The kinds of patterned cloth described would demand sustained tension and teamwork. None of this appears as a command in the text. They are interpretive reconstructions grounded in comparative archaeology and practical knowledge of ancient craft. None of these technical descriptions should lead us to a crude causal formula. Perfect craft yields divine presence. The narrative resists that equation. Craft is faithful response. The cloud does not descend because the seamstress sewed perfectly. It descends because God chooses to dwell. Yet crafting matters. The human labor is not incidental. It is the willing response that makes a place where divine presence can be recognized, sheltered, and carried. There is also an aesthetic dimension to consider. The tabernacle surfaces, the burnished gold, the polished acacia, the dyed threads, are not mere ornament. They form a sensory theology. Gold reflects the light of the lampstand. The fabrics absorb and soften, framing interior spaces. The scent of incense shapes a moment of approach. The material beauty summons attention and shapes devotion. For artisans, the aesthetics are practical theology. To make good work is to make a medium through which people can meet God. As the community moves with the tabernacle, the craftsmen remain in maintenance. The work does not end with dedication. Rather, a rhythm of service begins. Levitical teams attend to the daily lamp trimming, the mending of curtains, the polishing of fittings. The initial build becomes a perpetual stewardship. Whenever a curtain phrase or a fixture loosens, craftsmen reappear. Sometimes the same hands, sometimes the hands of a new generation trained under the original masters. There are human costs and sacrifices too. Time spent at the bench is time away from other tasks, herding, cooking, childcare. Yet within the camp's logic, these trades are communal assets. Craftsmen receive honor not because of social status in the old world, but because their labor sustains the people's covenantal life. The social economy of the camp shifts. Skill becomes ministry. One of the final images is quiet but powerful. After the cloud settles and the assembly breaks into reverent motion, a woman who had woven much of the inner curtain stands with the hem still coated with the dust of leeward winds. She watches as priests enter and perform rites. In her chest is a private mixture of relief and awe. The long hours at the loom have produced not only arts, but a place where strangers might meet God. This private contentment is emblematic. The tabernacle bears not only theological weight, but the accumulated labors of nameless people who will never appear in the public record. As we close, consider the tabernacle's legacy. It teaches that sacred space can be made by human hands when those hands are offered in willing devotion. It teaches that technique in teaching, skill passed from master to apprentice, are spiritual practices. It teaches that objects and images migrate across cultures, but can be reinterpreted within new covenants. And most of all, it teaches that divine presence, while sovereign, often chooses to dwell where human fidelity has prepared a place. If this reconstruction speaks to you and you want to follow the series that explores these workshops in greater detail, subscribe to stay with us through the next episodes where we unpack furnace reconstructions, loom techniques, and the daily rhythms of Levite maintenance. In the end, the tabernacle in the desert is both a tent and a testimony. It is a moving architecture of wood, metal, and cloth, and a moving story of people who were refashioned from subjects into stewards. The cloud that filled the tent of meeting becomes not only a sign that God had come near, but a seal on a human transformation. Staff became artist, slave became volunteer, spoil became sanctuary. The hands that beat gold and wove blue thread are the hands that built a home for holiness, and by doing so, they helped remake an entire people. If you would like to go deeper into any of these crafts, the metallurgical experiments, the loom reconstructions, or the logistical systems that made a mobile sanctuary possible, watch the next episode in this reconstruction series. In the description, you'll find sources, recommended readings, and notes on where our reconstructions draw their plausibility. Join us and meet again the hands that turned plunder into a place where God chose to dwell.